The bride vanished minutes before a wedding that would define the future of two kingdoms. With no time for explanations, the maid is forced to wear the dress and walk down the aisle with the prince. What begins as a farce transforms into a dangerous game of intrigue, passion, and power. This story of mistaken identity, conspiracies, and courage will leave you speechless. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. Emily ran through the palace corridors, her trembling hands clutching the crumpled note. The royal hall was filled with guests awaiting the start of the year's most important ceremony, the wedding of Prince Alexander to Princess Victoria from the neighboring kingdom, a union that would seal peace between the two kingdoms after decades of tension. The young maid stopped before the ornate door of the Queen Mother's chambers, hesitating for a moment before knocking. Inside the room, Lady Margaret, the matriarch of the royal family, was surrounded by advisors with alarmed expressions. "Your Majesty," Emily made a deep curtsy. "Princess Victoria. She—" "Speak up, girl," demanded the Queen Mother, her aged face marked by tension. "She's gone, my lady. She left only this note." The silence that followed was heavier than the humid summer air. Lady Margaret read the note quickly, her face paling with each line. The princess had fled, abandoning her matrimonial commitment minutes before the ceremony. "The ambassadors from the neighboring kingdom are in the front row," murmured the counselor Theodore. "If they find out about this, alliances will be broken." Before nightfall, the Queen walked to the window, observing the gardens where hundreds of guests were waiting. Her gaze fell upon Emily, who remained motionless near the door. "You," said the Queen suddenly. "What is your full name?" "Emily Barnes, Majesty. I've been Princess Victoria's personal maid since her arrival 3 months ago." Lady Margaret approached, examining the young woman from head to toe. Emily had the same brown hair and stature as the missing princess. Her face, though plainer, bore enough similarities to fool those who didn't know Victoria well. "Where were you raised?" "Girl?" "At St. Mary's Convent, my lady. I was educated by the sisters until I turned 16 when they sent me to serve at the palace." A calculating smile appeared on the Queen's lips. "Do the sisters still teach etiquette and reading to the orphans?" Emily nodded, confused by the direction of the conversation. "Yes, Majesty. I learned to read, write, embroider, and understand court protocols, like all girls destined for royal service." The matriarch exchanged glances with her closest advisor, who seemed to immediately understand the plan forming. "Everyone out," ordered the Queen to the others present in the room, "except you, Theodore, and the girl." When they were alone, Lady Margaret held Emily by the shoulders. "The kingdom is on the brink of a diplomatic crisis. We need a Princess Victoria today, even if only for a few hours." Emily's heart raced. "Majesty, I don't understand." "It's simple, girl. You will take Victoria's place in the ceremony. You'll wear her dress, the veil will cover your face, and no one will notice the difference." "But, Majesty, this is a farce, and when the prince discovers, he will discover only after the ceremony when it's too late. The marriage will have been consummated and the alliance sealed. Afterward, we'll resolve the problem of the real Victoria." Emily felt her stomach sink. It was madness, a betrayal of the prince and the neighboring kingdom. But before she could protest again, the Queen continued, "Make no mistake, girl, this is not a request. If you refuse, you'll be accused of complicity in the princess's escape and will pay with your freedom. If you accept, you'll have my eternal protection and gratitude." 2 hours later, Emily stood before a mirror, almost unrecognizable in the elaborate wedding dress and makeup that disguised her simpler features. Unknown chambermaids brought from other wings of the palace to maintain the secret adjusted the veil that would cover her face during the ceremony. "Remember, Theodore," whispered in her ear as he led her through the corridors, "you must not speak more than necessary. Answer only yes when they ask if you accept the prince. The Queen has already instructed the priest to abbreviate the vows." The royal hall was magnificent, decorated with white and gold flowers. Hundreds of candles illuminated the space while solemn music filled the air. At the altar, Prince Alexander waited, imposing in his formal attire. Emily had never seen him so close. He was taller and younger than he appeared from a distance, with a severe face that showed no emotion at the bride approaching. Each step was agony. Emily felt the curious looks, the weight of the dress, the suffocation of the too tight corset. This was not her life, not her destiny. She was merely a piece being moved on the royal politics chessboard. The ceremony proceeded like a hazy dream. Emily repeated words that weren't hers, made promises she couldn't keep. When the priest pronounced the final blessing, and the prince lifted her veil for the traditional kiss, she closed her eyes, expecting him to cry out in indignation upon seeing her face. But the prince only hesitated for an instant, his blue eyes registering surprise for a fleeting second, before fulfilling his role and briefly kissing her lips. The hall erupted in applause while Emily struggled to breathe. The following hours were a whirlwind of congratulations, dances, and forced smiles. Emily maintained the role, speaking as little as possible, always closely accompanied by Theodore, or the Queen herself, who ensured that no one had enough time with the princess to notice any inconsistencies. When she was finally led to the royal chambers for the wedding night, Emily felt her panic grow. The farce had gone too far. The chambermaids prepared her, dressing her in a delicate nightgown, and withdrew, leaving her alone to await the prince. Minutes later, the door opened. Alexander entered, no longer in his ceremonial attire, wearing only pants and a half-open white shirt. His gaze was penetrating, examining every detail of Emily's face. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice controlled but filled with contained fury. "And where is Victoria?" Emily trembled, unable to find words. The prince approached, not threateningly, but with the intensity of someone demanding answers. "I asked who you are," he repeated, "and why you're in my bride's place." "My name is Emily," she finally managed to say, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm Princess Victoria's personal maid. She fled this morning, leaving only a note. The Queen Mother ordered me to take her place to avoid a diplomatic scandal." Alexander ran his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "My own grandmother, deceiving me on my wedding day." He laughed humorlessly. "And you agreed to this absurd plan?" "I had no choice, Highness. I was threatened with imprisonment if I didn't obey." Something in the prince's gaze changed. He examined Emily again, this time with less anger and more curiosity. "Where were you educated?" "At St. Mary's Convent, my lord. I'm an orphan, raised by the sisters until I came to serve at the palace." "That explains your manners. You speak like someone who received education." Alexander walked to the window, observing the night. "You know what happens now, don't you? We are officially married, before God and the law. A marriage based on lies, but a marriage nonetheless." Emily spent her first week as princess under constant surveillance. Every movement was observed, every word analyzed. The ladies-in-waiting, hand-picked by the Queen Mother, never left her alone, constantly instructing her on how to carry herself, eat, walk, and speak. "Princess Victoria would never use that expression," whispered Baroness Eleanor, the most severe of the ladies. "And please keep your chin up. Royalty doesn't look at the ground." The nights were her only refuge. After the incident, on the wedding night, where nothing happened beyond the revelation of the truth, Prince Alexander kept his distance during the day, fulfilling only the official commitments at her side. At night, however, he came to their shared chambers for conversations that, surprisingly, became increasingly longer. "How was your day as a false princess?" he asked on the 8th night, pouring himself wine while watching Emily embroider by the window. "Exhausting, as always," she replied without raising her eyes from the fabric. "Today I learned that princesses must never show they're hungry, even if they haven't eaten for hours during a ceremony." Alexander smiled, a rare gesture that transformed his austere face. Victoria hated those rules. Perhaps that's why she fled? "Do you miss her?" The question escaped before Emily could contain it. The prince contemplated the wine in his glass. "How can I miss someone I barely knew? Our engagement was arranged years ago, but I only saw her in person 3 times. Before the wedding." I miss the idea of a real marriage, perhaps, the simplicity of fulfilling my duty without complications. Emily felt his gaze upon her. It wasn't a look of anger or resentment, but of genuine curiosity. "And you?" he asked. "Do you miss your previous life?" "I miss the freedom," confessed Emily. "As a maid, I was invisible. I could observe, listen, move through the corridors without anyone noticing me. Now I'm the center of all attention, but I feel more trapped than ever." "We are too." "Prisoners, then," concluded Alexander, raising his glass in an ironic toast. "You trapped in a role you didn't choose. I trapped in a destiny traced since my birth." In the following weeks, a strange routine was established. During the day, Emily was Princess Victoria, fulfilling commitments, learning protocol, avoiding any slip that might reveal her true identity. At night, in the royal chambers, she was just Emily, sharing increasingly intimate conversations with a man who, against all odds, was beginning to know her truly. One morning, upon returning from a stroll in the gardens, Emily found a small envelope on her embroidery cushion. There was no seal or signature, only her real name written in delicate handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened it away from curious eyes. "I know who you are, Emily Barnes. I know what you did. Soon, everyone will know." The blood froze in her veins. Someone besides the Queen Mother, Councillor Theodore, and the Prince knew her secret. Someone who could destroy everything with a simple word to the foreign ambassadors or to the court. In the days that followed, more notes appeared. On her pillow, inside a book she was reading, hidden among the petals of a flower arrangement, all with the same threatening message, all without clues about their sender. Emily observed every face in the palace, trying to identify suspicious looks, malicious smiles. Who could be behind those threats? And what would be the price of silence? "You're different," Alexander commented during one of their nightly conversations. "More distant, worried, what happened?" Emily hesitated. She trusted the prince, but exposing her concerns would be admitting how fragile her position was. Before she could decide, they heard knocks on the door. It was Theodore, his expression grave. "Highnesses, forgive the interruption, but I need to speak with the prince about an urgent matter." Alexander followed the counselor into the hallway, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts. Minutes later, when he returned, his face was pale. "What happened?" she asked, alarmed. "Rumors," he replied, pouring himself more wine. "They started in the nearby villages and have now reached the city. People are asking why Princess Victoria is never seen in public without a veil or without companions who control who approaches her." Emily felt her heart race. "And what did you tell Theodore?" "That we'll invent an excuse, that you're adapting to local customs or something like that." Alexander sighed deeply. "But the truth is that we can't maintain this farce forever. At some point the real Victoria will reappear, or someone will discover." "Someone already has," Emily finally confessed, showing the notes she had hidden. "I've been receiving threats for days." The prince examined the papers, his expression hardening. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I feared you would blame me, that you'd think I was careless." "Emily," he said, using her real name with surprising gentleness, "I would never blame you for something you didn't choose to do. We are both victims of circumstances." There was something new in Alexander's gaze, something that made Emily's heart leap. It wasn't just understanding or solidarity, it was something deeper, more dangerous. "I'll find out who's behind this," he promised, keeping the notes. "Meanwhile, don't stay alone. Whenever possible, have someone trustworthy nearby." "Who would be trustworthy?" Emily questioned bitterly. "The ladies chosen by your grandmother? The guards who answer to the council? I'm surrounded by people who would destroy me if they knew the truth." Alexander took her hands in his, an unexpected gesture that sent waves of warmth through Emily's body. "I am trustworthy," he said, "and I promise that I won't let anything bad happen to you." It was on that night that something changed between them. What had begun as a forced arrangement, a shared lie, was slowly transforming into an alliance, perhaps even into something more. In the weeks that followed, Emily began to observe the court with different eyes, seeking her hidden enemy. It was during a formal banquet that she noticed something strange. Duchess Charlotte, Alexander's distant cousin and a member of the royal council, was watching her with disturbing intensity. The woman, known for her beauty and ambition, rarely addressed the princess, but Emily frequently felt her calculating gaze following her through the halls. "Who exactly is Duchess Charlotte?" she asked Alexander that night. "What is her relationship to the royal family?" "Charlotte is the daughter of my father's cousin," he explained, frowning. "Why do you ask?" "She observes me constantly. Not like the others, with curiosity or disdain. There's something different in her gaze, and as if she knows something." Alexander became thoughtful. Charlotte always had ambitions greater than her title. "When we were children, she used to say she was born to be queen." He smiled at the memory. "At the time, it seemed like mere childish fantasy. And now? Now she's a council member and has my grandmother's confidence. Would she have reasons to harm you? Perhaps, if she knew the truth about you, she could use it to invalidate our marriage. And what would she gain from that?" "Time," answered Alexander. "Time to influence the council, to suggest another marriage more advantageous for the kingdom or for herself." The suspicion about Charlotte grew when Emily saw her in private conversation with Baroness Eleanor, precisely the lady who watched her the most. The two women fell silent abruptly when they noticed her presence, exchanging glances that confirmed the silent conspiracy. It was also during those days that Emily began to notice the harsh reality of the people beyond the palace walls. During an official tour of the city, she saw hungry children in the alleys, abandoned elderly, exhausted workers. The prosperity so celebrated in the royal halls did not reach those who needed it most. "As princess, can I do something for these people?" she asked Alexander, describing what she had seen. "The council controls the kingdom's resources," he explained bitterly. "Even as crown prince, I have little influence over their decisions. But when you become king, when I become king, I'll have to face centuries of tradition and entrenched privileges. It won't be easy." Emily reflected on his words. Perhaps this was the opportunity destiny had given her, not just to survive in a role she hadn't chosen, but to use that role to create real change. The next morning, against all the ladies' recommendations, Emily ordered her carriage to stop in a poor area of the city. Ignoring her escort's protests, she visited an overcrowded orphanage and promised improvements. In the palace kitchens, she organized the distribution of banquet leftovers to needy families. In her room, she began to embroider not just decorative flowers, but plans for schools and hospitals that she would present to the council. "You're being reckless," Alexander warned when he heard of her initiatives. "The council will see this as meddling in matters that don't concern you." "Let them see it as meddling," Emily responded firmly. "If being a princess means only wearing pretty dresses and smiling at banquets while people starve, then I prefer not to be a princess at all." The look Alexander gave her was full of admiration and concern. "You speak as if you were born for the throne, not to serve it." His words stayed with Emily in the following days as she continued her discreet charity initiatives. The news that Princess Victoria visited orphanages and organized donations spread quickly among the people. Soon Emily began receiving thank you letters and small handcrafted gifts that she valued more than all the royal jewels. But for every person who admired her, new enemies appeared in the palace corridors. The royal council, led by Duchess Charlotte, began to openly question her actions. In a tense meeting to which Emily wasn't invited, they discussed whether a foreign princess should have so much freedom to interfere in internal matters. "My grandmother informed me that you're causing discomfort among the councillors," Alexander commented that night. "Charlotte suggested that your actions could be interpreted as criticism of the current administration." "And they are," confirmed Emily without hesitation, "while they debate what type of marble to use in the new wing of the palace. Children sleep on the streets. How can I not criticize that?" Alexander observed her for a long time. 3 months ago, you were a maid terrified by the idea of replacing a princess. What changed? Emily reflected on the question. I realized that I have more power as a princess than I ever had as a maid, and if I have power, I have responsibility. The prince approached, touching her face with a gentleness that made her heart race. You would be a better queen than many who were born for it. The intimate moment was interrupted by urgent knocks on the door. It was Theodore, his face pale with concern. Highnesses, forgive the intrusion, but I must inform you that she has returned. No explanation was needed about who she was. Emily felt the blood freeze in her veins. The real Princess Victoria had returned. The next morning, the palace buzzed with rumors. Victoria was staying in an isolated wing, receiving only the Queen Mother and trusted counselors. The official news was that the princess had fallen ill during a secret religious pilgrimage, thus explaining her prolonged absence after the wedding. What will happen now? Emily asked Alexander as they pretended normalcy during breakfast. The council will meet this afternoon to discuss the situation. My grandmother wants us to maintain appearances until a decision is made. And what will that decision be? Annul our marriage? Send me back to the convent? Or something worse? Alexander held her hand under the table, an invisible gesture to the servants who were serving them. I won't allow them to harm you, I promise. The council meeting lasted for hours. Emily remained in her chambers, surrounded by ladies-in-waiting who now observed her with even more suspicious glances. When Alexander finally returned, his expression was grave. Victoria demands that the marriage be annulled. She claims she was deceived and replaced against her will. My grandmother is inclined to yield, fearing the international scandal if the truth comes to light. And you? Asked Emily, fearing the answer. What do you wish? Alexander hesitated, something rare, in a man normally so decisive. I don't know. 3 months ago, I only wished to fulfill my duty. Now, he didn't complete the sentence, but his gaze said what words couldn't express. Something had changed between them, something that went beyond the forced agreement and necessary lies. The final decision will be made tomorrow, he continued. Victoria will be present, as will you. The council will vote on whether to recognize or annul the marriage. That night, neither of them could sleep. They talked until dawn about possibilities, fears, and finally about feelings that could no longer be denied. If I could choose, began Alexander, stroking Emily's hair as she rested her head on his shoulder. If a prince could really choose. Don't say that, interrupted Emily. Don't nurture hopes that can't be realized. You have a duty to your kingdom, to your lineage. And what duty is that? To marry a woman who abandoned her commitment once and may do so again? Or to stay with someone who, even forced into a role she didn't choose, assumed it with dignity and compassion? His words warmed Emily's heart, but reality remained cold and implacable. She was a commoner, an orphan without name or fortune. The council would never accept such a union if they knew the truth. The council chamber was full the next morning. All the councillors, the Queen Mother, Prince Alexander, and for the first time in months, the two princesses, the real one and the substitute, face to face. Victoria was taller than Emily, with more angular features and a natural elegance. That came from years of aristocratic education. Her cold eyes examined the impostor with barely disguised disdain. This farce has lasted long enough, declared the real princess. I demand that my place be restored and that this maid be punished for her audacity. The maid acted under direct orders from the crown, intervened Alexander. If there are guilty parties here, she is not one of them. Duchess Charlotte, seated among the councillors, smiled discreetly. Perhaps we should hear what the impostor herself has to say in her defense. All eyes turned to Emily. This was the moment she most feared, facing not only the council but the woman whose place she had usurped. However, something within her strengthened. She was no longer the frightened maid who had been forced into a farce. She was someone who, even in terrible circumstances, had found her own voice. "I have no defense to present," she began, surprising everyone with her calmness. "I was ordered to replace Princess Victoria, and I obeyed as any servant would do. What I didn't expect was to discover that being a princess means much more than wearing a crown." Emily directed her gaze directly at Victoria. "During these months, I've visited overcrowded orphanages, seen abandoned elderly, children without schools. While you all," and here she looked at the council, "debate about traditions and alliances, the people suffer. If this is a defense, then I defend not my actions, but the right of these people to be heard." A tense silence followed her words. It was the Queen Mother who finally broke it. "Noble speech for someone in your position. But the fact remains, you are not the real princess. The marriage must be annulled." "Before we decide," interrupted Alexander, "there's something everyone must see." He removed a sealed envelope from his garments. "This is the note left by Princess Victoria on the day of our wedding. Until now, only a few of us knew its contents." Queen Mother paled. "Alexander, this is not necessary." "It is absolutely necessary, Grandmother." The prince broke the seal and unfolded the paper. "I asked the council's permission to read the exact words of Princess Victoria, written by her own hand on the morning of our wedding." After receiving reluctant nods, Alexander began to read. "I cannot and will not proceed with this marriage. I refuse to be just a piece of royal decoration, a womb to produce heirs, a signature on treaties I don't understand. I was born a princess, but I didn't choose this destiny. Now, for the first time, I make my own choice. Don't look for me, I won't return." The councillors exchanged shocked looks. Duchess Charlotte narrowed her eyes, her calculating mind already working on the implications of this revelation. Victoria herself, confronted with her words, kept her chin raised in silent defiance. "These words," continued Alexander, "reveal that the princess voluntarily abandoned her duties. Meanwhile, the woman who was forced to replace her assumed responsibilities that weren't hers and served the kingdom with dignity and compassion." "That doesn't change the fact that she's an imposter," argued an elderly councillor. "A commoner cannot be a princess." "Why not?" questioned Alexander. "The laws say that the prince must marry someone of noble blood to preserve the lineage. But what is nobility? Inherited titles or actions that benefit the kingdom?" The heated discussion that followed divided the council. Some defended tradition at all costs. Others, impressed by the prince's speech, began to consider alternatives. Duchess Charlotte, seeing her plans threatened, played her final card. "If I may," she said in a melodious voice, "perhaps we should consider a third path. Princess Victoria abandoned her duties, it's true. And this, Emily, doesn't possess the necessary bloodline. Why not annul both claims and seek a new alliance more advantageous for the kingdom?" Her eyes met Alexander's, and Emily finally understood the complete plan. Charlotte didn't just want to invalidate her marriage, she wanted to clear the way for herself or someone of her choosing. "An interesting proposal," commented the Queen Mother, observing her grandson's reaction. "The council needs to consider all options." It was at this moment that the door of the chamber opened abruptly. A young peasant entered, ignoring the guards' protests. In his hands, he carried a small package. "Forgive the intrusion, Majesties," he said, making an awkward bow, "but I've come to bring a gift for our princess, who saved my younger sister with her medicines." He approached Emily, not Victoria, and handed her the package. Others began to enter, an elderly woman leaning on a cane, a group of children from the orphanage, humble artisans. All brought small gifts and stories of how the princess had changed their lives. The Queen Mother, astonished, ordered the guards to restore order, but the damage was done. The councillors had witnessed the people's love for someone who, even without royal blood, had fulfilled the true duty of a princess. The council was adjourned after the unexpected interruption. As the councillors withdrew, murmuring among themselves, Emily remained in the room, stunned by what she had just witnessed. Those simple people, whom she barely knew, had risked the crown's wrath to defend her. "I've never seen anything like it," commented Alexander when they were alone. "In all the history of this kingdom, I don't recall a monarch who won so much affection from the people in such a short time." "I didn't do anything extraordinary," replied Emily. "I just treated them as people, not as subjects." Duchess Charlotte, who was observing the scene from the door, interrupted the moment with a cold smile. Impressive demonstration indeed. One could almost think it was carefully orchestrated. "Are you suggesting that I planned that?" questioned Emily, directly confronting the Duchess's calculating gaze. "I'm merely observing that such convenient coincidences are rare." Charlotte approached, her voice lowering to a whisper. "Don't delude yourself, Maid. The council may be momentarily moved, but centuries-old traditions won't be overthrown by a few peasants' tears. Your place is not on the throne." Before Emily could respond, the Duchess withdrew with the studied elegance of someone who had spent her life in the corridors of power. Her words, however, remained like a subtle poison, insinuating themselves into the insecurities that Emily tried to hide. That night, a private reception was held for the foreign ambassadors. The unusual situation, two women claiming the princess title, required diplomatic explanations. The Queen Mother, always skilled in politics, presented a softened version of events. Princess Victoria had made a spiritual retreat after the wedding, and her lady-in-waiting had temporarily assumed some of her public duties to avoid concerns. The ambassadors seemed skeptical, but the wine flowed generously, and the soft music created an atmosphere of forced normalcy. Emily observed everything from a corner, feeling more out of place than ever in her elegant blue dress. "You shouldn't hide in the shadows," said a familiar voice behind her. It was Councillor Theodore, who observed her with an enigmatic expression, especially when there are so many eyes looking for weaknesses. "It's difficult to shine when you don't have the right to be here," replied Emily. Theodore gave a long sigh. "You know, I've served 3 generations of the royal family. I've seen princes born to the throne who didn't deserve to even clean the palace staircases. And I've seen simple people with more nobility in their hearts than many of blue blood. Are you saying you support me?" "I'm saying that true power doesn't come from blood or titles, but from the ability to inspire others." Theodore slightly inclined his head. "And you, my young lady, seem to have that rare gift." Before the conversation could continue, a commotion arose in the center of the hall. Princess Victoria had fainted, falling dramatically into the arms of a nearby ambassador. Servants ran to help, while the Queen Mother ordered a doctor to be called immediately. "Interesting," murmured Theodore, observing the scene. Princess Victoria was never one for physical weaknesses. In fact, she was known for her exceptional endurance. Emily also observed, noticing something strange in the way Charlotte had quickly approached Victoria, as if expecting the incident. A disturbing thought began to form in her mind. The next morning, the news was that the princess had been the victim of a sudden illness, possibly a reaction to some food or drink. She had recovered, but the incident only increased the tension in the palace. "We need to talk," Emily said to Alexander when he returned from a visit to Victoria's room. "I believe something very serious is happening." In their private chambers, away from curious ears, Emily shared her suspicions. "I think Duchess Charlotte is trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Victoria's fainting, the threats I received, everything seems part of a larger plan." Alexander listened attentively, his face showing growing concern. "Charlotte has always been ambitious, but I never thought she would go this far. If she manages to invalidate my position and discredit Victoria at the same time, it would open the way for a third option," completed Alexander. "Probably herself or someone she can control." Emily felt a chill. And how far would she go to ensure that? The answer came sooner than they expected. That afternoon, during a private meal, Emily tasted something bitter in her tea. Years in the convent, where she had learned about herbs and remedies, made her immediately recognize the distinctive taste of certain poisonous plants. She pretended to drink, but discreetly discarded the liquid when the maid turned away. That same maid, she later discovered, had been recently assigned to her chambers on Duchess Charlotte's special recommendation. "She tried to poison me," Emily reported to Alexander, her voice trembling not with fear but with indignation. "Not to kill me, I believe, but to weaken me, as she did with Victoria." The prince was furious. "This is treason. I can have her arrested immediately. And what would be the charge? That she tried to poison an impostor. We need evidence, Alexander. Evidence that will convince the council. They decided to act discreetly. With Theodore's help, who proved to be an unexpected ally, they began to investigate Charlotte's connections. They discovered that she had bribed several key people in the palace, including a council member and the royal physician, to support her version of events. Meanwhile, the day of the final decision approached. The council would meet in 3 days to determine the fate of the royal marriage and, consequently, the future of the kingdom. On the eve of the great meeting, Emily was surprised by an unexpected visit to her chambers, Princess Victoria herself. "May we talk?" asked the real princess, dismissing the ladies-in-waiting with an imperious gesture. When they were alone, Victoria examined Emily with critical eyes. "So you're the maid who took my place. I must admit, you did a better job than I expected." "I had no choice," Emily replied simply. "We all have choices," Victoria retorted, walking around the room as if it was still hers. "I chose to flee from a marriage that would imprison me. You chose to assume a role that wasn't yours." "Why did you come back?" Emily asked directly. "If you hated the idea of being a princess so much, why return?" Victoria hesitated, something vulnerable briefly appearing in her haughty gaze. "Because I discovered that running from a problem doesn't solve it, and because—" She paused, as if weighing her next words. "Because I was informed that my absence was causing instability in the kingdom." Informed by whom? By Duchess Charlotte. "She found me in my hideout and convinced me to return to correct a great mistake." The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. Charlotte had located Victoria and persuaded her to return, probably with promises that she could invalidate the marriage and then honorably withdraw to a life away from the court, all part of her plan to create a power vacuum that she herself would fill. On the morning of the decisive meeting, the entire palace seemed to be holding its breath. Councillors, ambassadors, members of the nobility, and even representatives of the people gathered in the great throne room. The Queen Mother presided over the assembly, with Alexander at her right. Emily and Victoria occupied opposite chairs, like adversaries in a silent duel. Duchess Charlotte, elegant in a dark red dress, smiled discreetly as the proceedings began. She didn't know that, during the night, Emily, Alexander, and Theodore had mounted their own strategy. After long speeches about tradition, legitimacy, and the future of the kingdom, the Queen Mother finally opened the floor for the decisive vote. It was at this moment that Alexander asked to speak. "Before we decide, I request permission to present evidence of a conspiracy against the crown." A murmur ran through the room. The Queen Mother, surprised, reluctantly agreed. With solemn gestures, Alexander presented documents, testimonies, and even the poisoned tea preserved as evidence. The evidence clearly pointed to Duchess Charlotte as the architect of a plan to destabilize the kingdom and take control through manipulation and sabotage. "These are serious accusations," observed the Queen Mother, her face pale before the revelations. "Duchess Charlotte, what do you have to say in your defense?" Charlotte stood up, maintaining her composure even as her world crumbled. "Majesty, these evidences were clearly fabricated by those who wished to protect a farce. Everything I did was for the good of the kingdom, to restore legitimate order." It was then that Victoria's voice surprised everyone. "Legitimate order? It was you who found me, who convinced me to return with promises of freedom. You said I could invalidate the marriage and then withdraw to live as I wished. You never mentioned poisonings or conspiracies." Charlotte's face lost all color. "You're delirious, Princess. Perhaps you still suffer from the effects of your indisposition." "I'm not delirious," Victoria replied firmly. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone, she addressed Emily. "I don't wish to be a princess, I never wished it. But I also don't wish to be a pawn in power games. This woman," she pointed to Emily, "may not have royal blood, but she possesses something that many of us born in golden cradles will never have: genuine compassion for the people she serves." An astonished silence fell over the assembly. Charlotte herself seemed unable to believe what she was hearing. Alexander approached the center of the room, his royal bearing more evident than ever. "The council now has two options. It can cling to traditions of the past, invalidating a marriage that, although begun under false premises, has produced more good for the kingdom in a few months than many alliances of decades. Or it can look to the future, recognizing that true nobility is not in blood but in actions. The Queen Mother, who until then had observed everything with an impenetrable expression, finally spoke. "My grandson speaks with wisdom beyond his years. I myself, in my desperation to maintain political alliances, was responsible for initiating this situation. Perhaps it's time to admit that old traditions don't always serve new times." The vote that followed was historic. By a small majority, the council decided to recognize Emily as the legitimate princess, validating her marriage to Prince Alexander. Duchess Charlotte was stripped of her titles and exiled to a distant province, where she would remain under constant surveillance. As for Princess Victoria, she surprised everyone by formally renouncing her rights to the throne, declaring that she preferred to dedicate her life to the arts and study, away from court intrigues. In a private conversation with Emily, she confessed, "You conquered what I never could have, their respect. Use it wisely." In the months that followed, the kingdom witnessed profound transformations. Emily, now officially princess, instituted education programs for poor children, reformed laws that benefited only the nobility, and created an advisory council with representatives from all social classes. When the king fell ill, it was she who assumed many responsibilities alongside Alexander. In state meetings, her unique perspective, of someone who had known both the life of servants and nobles, brought a human dimension to political decisions. The announcement of her pregnancy a few months later was received with spontaneous celebrations throughout the kingdom, not because it would ensure the continuity of the royal lineage, but because it symbolized a new beginning, a fusion between worlds that had previously seemed irreconcilable. In an intimate ceremony, far from the rigid protocol of the court, Emily and Alexander renewed their marriage vows. This time, not as prince and impostor, but as equal partners, united not only by circumstances, but by choice and true love. Emily wore a simple dress that she had embroidered herself, decorated with roses and small thorns, symbols of the beauty and difficulties of the path she had traveled. Alexander, seeing her, understood that destiny, even through tortuous paths, had led them exactly where they should be. "For someone who never wanted to be a princess," he said, holding her hands, "you've become the best this kingdom has ever known." Emily smiled, thinking of the frightened maid she once was, the orphan educated by nuns, the young woman forced into a farce that would change her life forever. "I'm not a princess by birth," she answered, "but by choice. I choose to serve these people, this kingdom, and you every day." In the villages and cities, the story of the maid who became a princess was told in songs and plays, not as a fairy tale where the commoner finds a charming prince, but as a legend of courage, where an ordinary woman transforms an entire kingdom not through magic, but through compassion, integrity, and tireless work. Years later, when the crown finally passed to Alexander and Emily, the coronation ceremony broke all traditions. Held in a public square, it allowed citizens of all classes to witness the moment when the former maid officially became queen. "Power is not a privilege, but a responsibility," she declared in her coronation speech, "and I promise to carry that responsibility with the humility of someone who knows both the palace halls and the city streets." The kingdom flourished under their shared leadership. Schools were built, hospitals reformed, unjust laws abolished. The palace, once isolated by high walls and rigid traditions, regularly opened its doors to hear the needs of the people. And every morning, before assuming her royal duties, Queen Emily reserved an hour for embroidery, remembering her origins. And the long path traveled, from frightened maid to respected monarch, from forced impostor to leader chosen by a prince's heart and a people's will. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that Emily's journey, from the simplicity of the convent corridors to the royal halls, has touched your hearts. To continue this exciting experience, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore profound transformations and true love. Find it by clicking on the left. If this story of courage and overcoming touched you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Daily, we bring new narratives that reveal the beauty and complexity of life. What did you think of Emily and